April 20th, but it feels like it could be January 20th, um, with at least downstate getting some snow today. Kind of a weird thing, but uh, being Midwesterners, we are resilient and we will deal with it, right? So happy Tuesday to you all. A couple things we're going to talk about today. Getting that recording going. The some follow-up clarification and some questions we had regarding vendor NIGP code breakdown that we did last week. We'll just kind of unpack that a little bit more, talk about the difference between the advanced search in the function in BidBuy as well as the vendor NIGP code breakdown report that we talked about last week. So I don't have all the slides that are available on how you run the code breakdown. That's all on last week's, which is posted in our training Tuesday. But we'll talk about the difference between the two because they're very similar, but they do different, slightly different functions. And so depending on what you're wanting to get out of the system, you will either do the vendor NIGP code breakdown or that advanced search. So we'll talk about that. And then really just a reminder regarding non-responsive vendors. When you're deeming vendors non-responsive, then our fun fact of the day and the quote of the day. So first up, let's talk about the vendor NIGP code breakdown report that we talked about last week. So there are specific slides on last week's on the training Tuesday that go into how we do that. And I'm going to walk through it pretty quickly here, but just so you know, there is a specific document that was created by Randy Garst. Another shout out to Randy again. For the steps to do that. So I'm not going to go through all of the steps, so I will walk through it pretty quickly. But we want to talk about the difference between that because I got to thinking, okay, when would somebody use this NIGP code breakdown report versus just using the advanced search that's already built into the system? So from a high level view, we'll go over this slide, then I'll jump out and kind of walk through it. So advanced search versus the vendor NIGP code breakdown. What's the difference? The advanced search is you can search multiple parameters. So when I go to advanced search, you can search by a bunch of different parameters. So I think we would use it specifically for searching for BEP vendors or small business set-aside vendors, or you also can use it just for all vendors as well. But you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of what you're searching for, but you can only search for one NIGP code at a time. Whereas the vendor NIGP code breakdown report is where it's in the report section in BidBuy under the settings. You can search all vendors. It's not just BEP. So that's where I said it a few different times last week, and I hope you received my clarification email immediately after. I think I said it a few different times where I said when you're searching for BEP vendors, I want to be super clear, and hope you got that correction email right after the call, but it's all vendors. So that's if you're searching, you can't search by BEP vendors via NIGP code. That NIGP code breakdown report is for all vendors, not just BEP. And it's only searching by NIGP code, right? So you're not searching by these other parameters like BEP or small business or multitude of other parameters. It's only by NIGP code, but you can select multiple NIGP codes. So you could go in and look at that and go, okay, how many vendors could we reach by using these multiple NIGP codes? Okay, so let's kind of unpack that a little bit, and I'm gonna jump away from my slides and go into BidBuy. Into BidBuy. Okay, so first up, we're going to talk about how we go to that vendor NIGP code breakdown. It's in the upper right-hand corner, and once again, we have screenshots and all the steps are on that other slide. And you go to reports. So this is a little bit of a review from last week. Scroll all the way down the bottom, vendor NIGP code breakdown. It's going to take me into the business intelligence tool that we have in BidBuy. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click the input control up here in the left-hand corner. It's going to bring us a pop-up. And as a reminder, it automatically selects the very first NIGP class and class item code. And so you can either unclick that or select or hit deselect all. Then you can type in your NIGP code, or you can scroll down if you'd like. Let's see, I'll just do 918, which is the one I searched before. You can see on the right-hand side, this tab, it shows what you have selected. And so you can search multiple codes there, right? I can go back there. I have selected the 918, but let's say I want to select, so 918. Now I want to go down to the class item. Once again, you have the first one's highlighted. So I can select 38. Now that's selected. I can go in and select multiple codes, right? So now I go maybe 05. Um, I don't know. At this point, I'm just kind of selecting some things. But you can see where you can select multiple codes. Okay, we hit OK, and now it's going to run that report, and you can then export to Excel. Okay, so now you have a spreadsheet of all of those NIGP codes that you selected. And we also had a great reminder last week too that this page right here only shows the first 15. So you need to actually export it in order to see all of your NIGP codes. But these are all vendors that are all registered for all those multiple codes that you selected. Okay, so you can get obviously quite a long list here since we did multiple codes. Okay. Let's see, I have a question here. If you enter multiple codes like 91030 and 92510, you will also get 91010, 92530. So you may have ones you don't want. Oh, I see what you're saying. So yeah, if you are selecting multiple codes, um, here's a good example. I selected 918 at the top and 9138. If you are doing the class code is different. Let's see, how's a better way to phrase this? If you are selecting 918, it's also going to take into account if you do two different NIGP classes. Many times we see them; they're built within the NIGP codes. The class is the same, but then you have multiple items. I think that's probably where this is most beneficial. But if you have multiple NIGP classes codes, it's going to search for that both of those classes linked in with that class item. So you're kind of getting, it's searching both of each. Okay, so that's, you can see well, that's specific to just the NIGP code. Now let's go back to BidBuy and show how we do the advanced search, which is slightly different. So you go to advanced search, and then you're asked to select your document type. You go to vendors. This is also really helpful too if a vendor doesn't know if they're registered or not. You can always search by vendor name to see if they're registered in BidBuy. And so this is where it opens up all these different parameters that you can search by vendors. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you see where you have the chance to put in your NIGP code. So once again, in this case, I'm going to look for the same 91838, just happened to be one of the ones I was searching. So you can see where I can only search for one NIGP code, but I can also have all of these different parameters to search for. So for instance, if I wanted to search for BEP firms, it doesn't have a check all under BEP, so you'd want to select each one of those. And then you could hit search. Similarly, you have the small business set aside. So if you wanted to and this isn't attaching to any procurement at this point, right? This is just searching to get a better feel for how many vendors you could potentially be adding to a procurement. Once I have this list, it's just a list. It's not we're not attaching it to any particular procurement at this point. But you can see at this point I'm searching for BEP firms that are registered under that 91838. Then you can search. And then we move this box out of the way. At this point, you have your list. You can see your number, and then you can export over here on the right-hand side. You can export to CSV or Excel. So I hit Excel, and now I have my spreadsheet for all of our BEP vendors that are registered for that 91838 code. Okay, so they're kind of operating. They're similar in some ways, but of course they're going to be slightly different as well. Let's see. Let's have a question here. Is the resulting list unduplicated results when you do multiple codes? Let's see. I'm not exactly sure. I'll have to run some tests on that. That's a good question. Um, it's not because I would have to know if a vendor was registered for multiple codes. So let me circle back on that one. That's a good question. Um, okay, we have an answer already. Perfect. No, you will get duplicates if they're registered for both codes. Thank you. Appreciate that. Next question, when a vendor is interfaced from IPG and is a small business set-aside vendor, will their vendor record in BidBuy be updated based on new registrations being completed annually? For example, they were a small business set-aside vendor when initially interfaced, but 3 years later, their registration for small business set-aside is no. So the answer to that question is IPG interfaces with BidBuy on a nightly basis. So every 24 hours it gets updated. So the answer to your question would be it would be updated in BidBuy. So if let's just even get more specific. Let's say a vendor, not even worried about 3 years ago. Let's say a vendor expired yesterday. Their IPG registration expired yesterday, and they were in the small business set aside program, and they did not renew in time. The answer to their small business set aside question in BidBuy this morning would have changed from yes to no. So it's a nightly interface. Okay, no other questions here. At the end, can you remind us how to reset a locked password? I have a staff person locked out. Yeah, that's going to be an email that just needs to go to stateuser.bidbuy@illinois.gov. Anytime you get locked out and need to do if you're locked. Okay, so if you have any other questions regarding those two things, feel free to reach out and we can definitely walk through that. So next up on our slides is really just a reminder regarding deeming vendors non-responsive. So this is for IFBs, RFPs. You will complete the non-responsive form here. I have a link specifically to it, but we'll walk through where it's at too. It's in the Procurement Resources Library on the CPOGS website. And once that is signed by the APO and the SPO, it will be attached in BidBuy at the bid tab. So it needs to go into that procurement file, and the timeline would be it's being attached at the bid tab because that's the point where you wouldn't be able to attach it prior to that, right? And that's all on the job aids as well. If applicable, if there is a vendor being deemed non-responsive, that's attached at the bid tab. And you need to communicate to the vendor the reason why they're being deemed non-responsive. So this can be a letter. In the past, uh, some agencies may still be sending a letter, and in the past there was it was a letter, not just an email. Or some agencies maybe it's a letter that's attached to an email, so it's sent to them via email. Either way is okay. We just want to make sure that it's very clear to the vendor why they're being deemed non-responsive. Now this is only applicable on IFBs and RFPs, so bidders and offerers. This isn't applicable for small purchases. But it still is good to, we would want to let vendors know why they'd be deemed non-responsive. So I guess it's more of a best practice for small purchases, mostly because the key point here is we just want to minimize repeated vendor mistakes. We see a lot of vendors that are, across the board, multiple agencies where they're being deemed non-responsive for things that many times are out of our control as procurement people, but we just want to minimize that because we don't want, doing it once is bad and not bad enough. If, we see why they're sometimes where vendors would be deemed non-responsive, but if we see it again the next time that procurement is put out, that is frustrating. And so for example, um, for an IFB, let's say the vendor is not registered with Board of Elections, for example. That's a really common one. If we need to make sure that that's communicated to the vendor, so it's very clear for them that they need to be registered, and they, there really is no way around that. They have to be deemed non-responsive at that point. But many times, if it gets put out again, because maybe that vendor was the only vendor that responded, now we want to make sure that they do get registered. So that key point, like I said, is just to minimize the repeat mistakes, and make it very clear on the front end sometimes if you can, that if it's an IFB, the vendors do need to be registered as a with the Board of Elections. That's just one specific example. So let me go out and just show that form. Maybe some of you haven't seen the form before. Where did it go? So I'm going to go to the website first just to show you where it's at. On the CPOGS website, in the Procurement Resource Library. Of course, you have the link in the slides, but it's handy if you know exactly where it's at. And it's in the State Purchasing Officer Determination Forms. It's this request for and determination of non-responsive or not responsible form, version 19.1. And I already had it pulled up here. This is an example of what it looks like. You can see a state agency requesting to declare a bidder or offerer non-responsive or not responsible shall make the request in writing to the state purchasing officer. So this is the form that's completed. You click in the boxes and fill out the information. It's signed by the agency requester and the state purchasing officer. And so you have a couple different fields that need to be completed, just the name of the vendor. Are they disqualified because of non-responsive or non-responsible? Most of the time it's non-responsive, but non-responsible is certainly appropriate. And then just a brief description of the factual basis for disqualification. Um, in our example that we were talking about, vendor was not registered with Board of Elections at time of bid opening, for instance. And then you have the statute and the rules, solicitation requirement basis for disqualification. And then the SPO would put in whether they approve or deny it. So either way, the SPO could, for whatever reason, I mean, there's a number of reasons why a vendor could be deemed non-responsive, right? Maybe it had to do with specifications or any number of other reasons. I just picked the Board of Elections example because that's a fairly common one we see. And then SPO comments if they need to add any additional information. And then the SPO signs it, sends it back to the agency, and then it's attached in bid buy. Okay, we want to minimize those multiple repeated mistakes from a vendor. All right, so we'll go back to if you have any questions, I'm not seeing any questions regarding that. A lot of the non-responsiveness questions will be on a case-by-case basis, so you can always reach out to your SPO, your APO, and or reach out to me if those folks have any other questions regarding that. Okay, go back to our slideshow here. No, you know what? This was from last week, but I think I'm going to keep this slide just on there as we're getting repeated questions regarding this. Just where can I find those Training Tuesday and bid buy training links? So we won't hit them each week, but there's the links, and that can be helpful. I was pretty lazy on my fun fact of the day today. Sorry. It is my wife's birthday, so happy birthday to Sarah, to a bunch of people that don't know her. So, but I did laugh about the Dwight quote here. It's the anniversary of your birthday. You're only born once. And our quote of the day, it's not really a quote. I came across this. This is one of those perfect uh, Facebook scrolls, and I was like, oh, I love that. I'm going to grab that. The importance of small steps. So, not a quote of the day, and not really a meme, I guess, but just a visualization of those small steps that you can take each day that really add up. Okay, let's see. We have another question. If a small business set-aside vendor adds NIGP codes under commodity codes and services after the bid opening date, are they non-responsive? Um, okay, let's see. I.e., it was 419, and they added NIGP codes for the bid on 420 in bid buy. Well, here's the thing. So a vendor, for a small business set aside vendor, they have to change their NIGP codes in IPG. I might need to get at some additional questions here. So you said that they added their NIGP codes in bid buy after the bid was opened. I mean, they wouldn't be deemed non-responsive because we small business set-asides are not registered for particular codes. They're just registered as a small business. So it's a little bit different than BEP, whereas BEP vendors are registered for those specific codes. Small business set-aside vendors, they are registered as small business set-aside vendors for essentially all the NIGP codes. So in this case, unless I'm missing something here, and I'd like to double check with you, they wouldn't be deemed non-responsive after if they added their NIGP code later. The only thing I'm getting though is if it was set aside and they weren't registered for that code at the time of the bid opening date, I don't know how they would have known of the procurement, because it should have been restricted to only those small business set aside vendors that were registered at that time that it went out. If we need to kind of dig into that a little bit more, please reach out to me or reach out to your SPO too. All right, everybody, this video will be, or recording will be out on the Tuesday training page per usual, a little bit later today. And have a great rest of your week. Hopefully we don't have to get the snow shovels out too much, but we'll see. Thanks, everybody.